Hello and welcome to the Strange Tales podcast presented by me, your host Winston R. Douglas. We are a podcast that looks at weird and wonderful tales from history, true crime, conspiracies and much more. I will try to cover various topics from different eras. Hopefully we can take a journey through history together. If you are a first-time listener, please look back on our previous episodes. If you are a returning listener, thank you for your continual support. If you enjoy the podcast, please smash that gorgeous like button, and subscribe so that you will be notified to future shows. Also, if you could write a 5-star review, that would really help us get the word out, so other people can enjoy the podcast as well. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Strange Tales Pod. Or you can message me at strangetalespod@gmail.com, with feedback or ideas on future shows. If you would like to support the podcast, you can do so through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/strangetalespod. Where we have plans from as little as $3 a month, and you can opt out any time. Any help is much appreciated. The 1990 Strangeways Prison riot was a 25-day prison riot and rooftop protest at Strangeways Prison in Manchester, England. The riot began on 1 April 1990 when prisoners took control of the prison chapel, and the riot quickly spread throughout most of the prison. The riot and rooftop protest ended on the 25th of April when the final 5 prisoners were removed from the rooftop, making it the longest prison riot in British penal history. 1 prisoner was killed during the riot, and 147 prison officers and 47 prisoners were injured. Much of the prison was damaged or destroyed, with the cost of repairs coming to £55 million. The riot sparked a series of disturbances in prisons across England, Scotland, and Wales, resulting in the British government announcing a public inquiry into the riots headed by Lord Woolf. Okay, let's get into today's strange tale. Manchester's Strangeways Prison, which opened in 1868, was a local prison designed to hold prisoners from the surrounding area, mainly those on remand or serving sentences of less than 5 years. At the time of the riot, the main prison consisted of 6 wings connected by a central rotunda known as the Centre. Convicted adult prisoners were held in wings A, B, C and D, and convicted young offenders were held in E wing, which was physically separated from the centre by gates. Convicted prisoners on Rule 43 were held on landings C1 and C2 of C wing, and remand prisoners on Rule 43 were held on the 4th landing on E wing. F wing contained administrative offices on the lower floor and the chapel on the upper floor. Remand prisoners were held in wings G, H, I and K of a separate prison, linked to the main prison through workshops and a kitchen. The certified normal accommodation for Strangeways, the number of prisoners the prison was designed to hold, was 970. The population of the prison had increased in the months before the riot, from 1,417 in January 1990 to a peak of 1,658 on the 27th of March. On the 1st of April, the prison contained 1,647 prisoners, about 925 convicted adult prisoners, 500 remand prisoners and 210 convicted young offenders. Prisoners felt their complaints about conditions were being ignored. Remand prisoners were only allowed out of their cells for 18 hours per week, and category A prisoners were locked in their cells for 22 hours a day, and rarely left their cells except for slopping out, a 1-hour exercise period each day, or a weekly shower. In March 1990, Dominic Noonan was transferred from Strangeways to Home Prison Hull. Noonan was the organizer of the Prisoners' League Association, PLA, an organization formed in 1989 which campaigned for prisoners' rights. Its aims included initiating legal proceedings against prison staff for mistreatment of prisoners, and picketing outside prisons in which prisoners were mistreated. The PLA were active at Strangeways Prison, and Noonan's transfer demonstrates prison officers were aware of rising tensions inside the prison. On the 26th of March 1990, Barry Morton was taken to the punishment block and strip-searched after being visited by his mother, as prison officers believed she had brought drugs into the prison for him. During a struggle he sustained a black eye and swollen nose, and the following day he was released back into the main prison along with another prisoner, Tony Bush. Later the same day, Bush and Morton climbed onto the roof of the prison, and staged a 20-hour rooftop protest. On the 31st of March there was a 30-minute sit-down protest in the chapel after a film was shown, which ended after a prison officer promised to listen to the prisoners' grievances. The same evening it is reported that a black prisoner was assaulted by prison officers in front of other prisoners, and injected with lergactile, a sedative used to control prisoners, known in prisons as the liquid cosh. Prisoners then decided to stage a further protest in the chapel the following day, the 1st of April. The riot. Prison officers had advance warning that an incident would occur in the chapel on the 1st of April, and security was increased. Extra prison officers were used to escort prisoners to the service, and 14 officers were inside the chapel supervising the service instead of the usual total of 8. An additional 7 officers were also stationed in the vestry outside the chapel. The service was attended by 309 prisoners, which was about the usual attendance, but all Rule 43 prisoners were prevented from attending as a precautionary measure. A senior prison officer believed the prisoners would attempt another sit-down protest with the possibility of hostage-taking, and instructed staff to evacuate the chapel if trouble began. At approximately 11 a.m., a visiting Church of England preacher had just delivered the sermon, and the prison chaplain, Reverend Noel Proctor, stood to thank the preacher when prisoner Paul Taylor took the microphone from him and addressed the congregation. Reverend Proctor was recording the service for distribution to a prayer group, and the subsequent events were recorded. Noel Proctor, after that remarkable message that has Paul Taylor, I would like to say, right, that this man has just talked about blessing of the heart, and a hardened heart can be delivered. No, it cannot, not with resentment, anger and bitterness and hatred being instilled in people. A prisoner, fuck your system, fuck your rules. Noel Proctor, right lads, sit down. Noel Proctor, right lads, down. Down. Come on, this is no way to carry on in God's house. A prisoner, fuck your system. Noel Proctor, right lads, sit down. This is completely out of order. Sit down. A prisoner, why is it? It's been waiting to happen forever. It will never change. Noel Proctor, come on. This is terrible. Noel Proctor, all of you who want to go back to your cells, go the back of the church please. A prisoner, what? You're a fucking hypocrite, you. Noel Proctor, I'm trying to help you, to keep you. A prisoner, leave it, mate. As Reverend Proctor was appealing for calm, a prisoner brandishing 2 sticks shouted out, "You've heard enough, let's do it, get the bastards." Other prisoners responded by donning masks and brandishing weapons, and 3 prison officers started to leave the chapel as earlier instructed. A set of keys was taken from a prison officer when a number of officers were attacked by prisoners wielding fire extinguishers, table legs and fire buckets. A number of prisoners attempted to leave the chapel via the vestry. At the same time, the 7 prison officers there attempted to gain entry to the chapel. Once they managed to do so, the officers were attacked by prisoners, and a second set of keys was taken from one of them. Some prisoners helped to get injured officers and Reverend Proctor to a place of safety via the vestry, while others barricaded entrances to the chapel or attempted to gain access to the roof. The prison officers guarding the gates outside the chapel abandoned them, and ran towards the center. The prison officer in charge of the center saw his colleagues running from the direction of the chapel, but due to the presence of scaffolding he was in a poor position to view the upper levels, and mistakenly assumed he saw prisoners running from the chapel. He informed other officers on C1 and D1 of this and, upon hearing that prisoners were in possession of keys, told them and officers on A1 that they should evacuate the prison. Governor Morrison, who was responsible for the main prison, then ordered officers to evacuate the center at 11:13 a.m. as he mistakenly believed prisoners had entered the center. By this time prisoners had gained access to the roofs of E and F wings, and from there gained access to other wings by making holes in unprotected office ceilings. The prisoners found A and B wings unsupervised as the prison officers had already evacuated, and began to free other prisoners who were still locked in their cells. The prison officer in charge of the first landing of C wing was ordered to evacuate, and with the help of 3 other officers evacuated the 73 Rule 43 prisoners being held there, being fearful for the safety of the prisoners who were regarded as sex offenders. Due to rioting prisoners entering the wing, the officers were unable to evacuate a further 7 Rule 43 prisoners who were being held on the second landing. Rioting prisoners also gained access to E wing, where the Rule 43 prisoners had been left locked in their cells after the prison officers evacuated. A number of these Rule 43 prisoners were attacked by rioting prisoners. One such prisoner was Derek White, who was being held on remand on charges of indecent assault and buggery. White later died in North Manchester General Hospital on the 3rd of April after being admitted suffering from head wounds, a dislocated shoulder and chest pains. At 11:43 a.m. rioting prisoners were seen approaching the remand prison, which was still secure. The prison governor, Brendan O'Friel, arrived at the prison at 11:55 a.m. and gave orders to defend the remand prison. He later recalled that, "By 12 o'clock when I came in it looked as if we'd lost control of the whole thing. My first decision was to send a Governor 5 back up to the remand prison to see if we could hold it, but it was too late. That decision, had it been taken half an hour earlier, would have meant we could have held the remand prison, meaning we could have kept another 400 locked up. Assuming the doors would have held, that sort of thing. But we had about 200 staff on duty, and we must have lost 9 or 10 casualties of one sort or another, and then you lose staff getting the casualties out. We didn't have a lot of the staff come pouring in until about 1 o'clock. I tell you what really bugged us was there an element of April Fool about it. We rang staff up about it, who said you must be joking, is this an April Fool? That's what happened when they rang up my home, my son thought it was an April Fool." Rioting prisoners gained access to the remand prison at 12:20 p.m. through the kitchens in G Wing, and began freeing prisoners who were still locked in their cells using stolen keys or improvised tools such as iron bars and fire extinguishers. At this point the rioting prisoners were in control of all accommodation wings of the prison. A large number of prisoners were on the prison roof, and roof tiles and other missiles were thrown at prison officers on the ground. Rioting inside the prison continued with cells being damaged and fires being started, and at 3:40 p.m. the Public Relations Department of the Home Office issued a statement. At 11 a.m. a disturbance started in the chapel at Strangeways Prison when some 300 prisoners attacked staff. Those prisoners then gained access to the chapel roof and then broke into the living accommodation in the main prison. Other prisoners, including those on remand, joined in the disturbance and staff had to be withdrawn. The perimeter is secure. Between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. approximately 800 prisoners had surrendered, and arrangements were made for them to be transferred to other prisons. At 8 p.m. Governor O'Friel agreed that prison officers should enter E Wing, and at 8:05 p.m. approximately 10 control and restraint, CANDRE, units each consisting of 12 prison officers entered the wing. By 8:10 p.m. all 4 landings of E Wing had been secured, and one CANDRE unit progressed to the center where they fought with rioting prisoners. This was reported to Governor O'Friel, who instructed the officers not to move beyond E Wing. Scaffolding poles and other missiles were thrown at the CANDRE teams from the roof area above the 4th landing in E Wing, and when prisoners broke onto the wing the CANDRE teams withdrew at 0:22 a.m. on the 2nd of April, leaving prisoners in control of the wing. Up to 1,100 of the 1,647 prisoners were involved in the rioting, and by the end of the first day 700 had surrendered and been transferred to other prisons along with 400 prisoners who were not involved in the rioting. Between 200 and 350 prisoners occupied the rooftop of the main prison during the night. Rooftop protest. At 7 a.m. on the 2nd of April, an estimated total of 142 prisoners were still in control of all the accommodation wings of the prison. Some prisoners on the roof gave clenched fist salutes to the crowd watching below. Some prisoners were wearing prison officers' hats and uniforms, while others were wearing masks improvised from towels and blankets. A banner was unveiled that read "No Dead," in response to claims in the press that between 11 and 20 prisoners had been killed in the rioting. At 10 a.m., Kandra units entered the remand prison and regained control, with 6 prisoners surrendering peacefully. A Home Office statement was released at 11:45 a.m. stating that no bodies had been found in the remand prison, and 12 prison officers and 37 prisoners had received treatment in hospital to date. Further prisoners surrendered the same day, and by 6 p.m. 114 prisoners remained in the prison. On the 3rd of April, newspapers published pictures of the prisoners' "No Dead" banner, while still insisting that 20 prisoners had been killed. The prisoners responded with a banner that read "Media Contact Now." The Manchester Evening News newspaper was contacted from inside the prison by telephone, and prisoners outlined their demands. Improved visiting facilities, including the right to physical contact with visitors and a children's play area. Category A prisoners would be allowed to wear their own clothes and be able to receive food parcels. Longer exercise periods. An end to 23-hour-a-day lockup. At 11:10 a.m. Michael Unger from the Manchester Evening News was allowed into the prison as an independent observer. Unger met prisoners who described their grievances to him, which included mental and physical brutality, poor food and conditions, and misuse of drugs in controlling prisoners. While Unger was inside the prison, 12 Kandra units attempted to regain control of E-Wing, in what became known as the Battle for E-Wing. Prisoners built barricades and threw scaffolding poles at the Kandra units, and after approximately 30 minutes the Kandra units withdrew without regaining control of the wing. By the end of the 3rd day of the riot, prisoners still controlled the upper levels of the prison, but prison officers had regained control of the lower level, and a Home Office statement was issued. During the course of the evening, prison staff have had access at ground level to all wings in the main prison. No bodies have been found. Earlier today, prison staff gained access to the main prison building in order to remove barricades to allow the surrender of inmates who wished to do so. No inmates were injured during this process. 9 prison staff were taken to outside hospital for treatment. 2 remain overnight for observation. Negotiations were carried out by prison staff, 31 inmates surrendered. All of those who surrendered have been interviewed, medically examined and fed. They will be transferred to other accommodation as soon as practicable. On the 4th of April, Governor O'Friel spoke to the press for the first time, describing the riot as an explosion of evil which was quite terrible to see. Also that day the Prison Officers Association claimed that Rule 43 prisoners were being treated in North Manchester General Hospital for castration wounds, which was repeated by sections of the press despite being categorically denied by the hospital's public relations officer and consultant in charge. 29 prisoners surrendered during the day, leaving 26 prisoners inside the prison, 11 of whom had been identified by the prison service. Also that day a prison officer died in hospital from pneumonia. He had not been injured during the riot and suffered from a long-standing medical condition. 2 more prisoners surrendered on the 5th of April, the same day as the Home Office announced a public inquiry into the riot headed by Lord Woolf. By this time plans to retake the entire prison by force had been scrapped due to the likelihood of fatalities among prisoners or prison officers. That evening the police and prison officers introduced new tactics designed to weaken the resolve of the prisoners and to prevent them from sleeping. Loud music was played, lights were shone at the roof, and prison officers banged on their riot shields and shouted at the prisoners, including calling them beasts, a term commonly used among prisoners at that time to refer to sex offenders. The rooftop protest was watched by a crowd of onlookers and supporters outside the prison. Various political groups also attended in support of the prisoners, including anarchist group Class War, the Revolutionary Communist Group, and the Prisoners' League Association. On the 6th of April, Paul Taylor attempted to shout out the prisoners' demands to the crowd gathered below, but he was drowned out by police sirens. Taylor and other prisoners responded by unfurling a banner which read "We fight and stand firm on behalf of humanity." On the 9th of April, former prisoner John McVicker called for the retaking of the prison by force at the earliest possible opportunity. By the 10th of April, more prisoners had surrendered, leaving 13 inside the prison. 3 more prisoners surrendered the following day, one of whom, Barry Morton, had taken part in the rooftop protest on the 26th of March. On the 16th of April, another 3 prisoners surrendered when they became ill with food poisoning. Local businesses were calling for an end to the riot due to the disruption caused, including the closure of roads around the prison. A leather jacket retailer in the vicinity of the prison claimed to have lost £20,000 in revenue since the riot had begun. Greater Manchester Police asked for £2 million to cover the costs of policing the riot, which it described as the most savage incident of its kind ever experienced within the British prison service. On the 17th of April, the remaining 7 prisoners began negotiations to attempt to bring the rooftop protest to an end. Negotiations took place inside the prison between 2 Home Office officials and prisoner Alan Lord, who was negotiating on behalf of the remaining prisoners. On the 23rd of April, Lord was captured by a Candra unit while on his way to meet the negotiators. Mark Williams, one of the remaining prisoners, later described his reactions to the negotiations and Lord's capture. The last 5 prisoners descend from the roof in a cherry picker: Mark Williams, John Murray, Paul Taylor, Martin Bryan, and Glyn Williams. David Bell, the Home Office negotiator, kept contradicting himself, as if in a bid to prolong the negotiations. He would agree to our terms, then he would try and tell us it was out of his hands, and go back on his word. If it was out of the Home Office's hands, then whose hands was it in? I think the final stages were messed around by the Home Office so that our protest could help to divert the public's attention from the poll tax revolt that was going on throughout the country. As Alan Lord was snatched after being asked to negotiate on behalf of us all, this made us all more defiant about ending the protest. Following the capture of Lord, the remaining prisoners agreed that the 25th of April would be the final day of the protest. Prison officers entered the prison early in the morning, and gradually began to occupy the upper landings. At 10:20 a.m. one of the remaining prisoners, a 17-year-old on remand for joyriding, was captured, leaving 5 prisoners remaining on the roof. When prison officers reached the roof, they put up a sign similar to the ones used by prisoners throughout the protest, which read "HMP in charge, no visits." At 6:20 p.m. the remaining 5 prisoners were removed from the roof in a cherry-picker hydraulic platform, giving clenched fist salutes to the press and public as they descended. During the course of the 25-day riot, the longest in British penal history, 147 prison officers and 47 prisoners had been injured. The Strangeways riot caused a number of protests at prisons across England, Scotland, and Wales, described as either solidarity actions or copycat riots. Approximately 100 remand prisoners at Home Prison Hull staged a sit-down protest in the exercise yard on the 1st of April, after hearing about the Strangeways riot on the radio. Disturbances occurred the same day at Home Prison Gartrey, Home Prison Kirkham and Home Prison Rochester, although the Gartrey protest had started 3 days earlier over conditions in the prison. There were minor disturbances at Home Prison Lindholme, Home Prison Low Newton and Home Prison Bedford on the 2nd of April, Home Prison Durham, Home Prison Winchester and Home Prison Wandsworth on the 4th of April, and Home Young Offenders Institute Glen Parva on the 6th of April. The weekend of the 7th of April and the 8th of April saw protests across the prison system. At Home Prison Leeds there was a sit-down protest after the arrival of over 100 prisoners who had been transferred from Strangeways. At Home Prison Dartmoor, between 100 and 120 prisoners, wrecked D wing of the prison, and 12 prisoners also protested on the roof of C wing, unfurling a banner that read "Strangeways, we are with you." 32 prisoners from Dartmoor were transferred to Home Prison Bristol, where there was another major protest following their arrival. Up to 400 prisoners took over 3 wings of the prison, and held control of them for 2 days. 130 prisoners at Home Prison Cardiff destroyed cells. A 20-hour rooftop protest took place at Home Prison Stoke Heath, and disturbances occurred at Home Prison Brixton, Home Prison Pentonville, Home Prison Stafford and Home Prison Shepton Mallet. A second protest took place at Home Prison Hull, where 110 prisoners staged a sit-down protest in the exercise yard. Prisoners smashed windows at Home Prison Verne on the 9th of April, and 40 prisoners held a prison officer hostage for 24 hours after taking over a hall at Home Prison Shotts on the 10th of April. On the 12th of April, 2 teenage remand prisoners at Home Prison Swansea barricaded themselves into their cell for 17 hours, and on the 22nd of April between 80 and 100 remand prisoners staged an 18-hour rooftop protest at Home Prison Ashfield in Pucklechurch. On the 2nd of April newspapers reported a weekend of anti-authority violence, as in addition to the Strangeways riot the poll tax riot had occurred in London on the 31st of March. Reports of the violence at Strangeways included kangaroo courts, hangings, castrations and that between 11 and 20 prisoners had been killed. On the 3rd of April the front page of the Daily Mirror read "Prison mob hang cop," and claimed a former policeman imprisoned at Strangeways for rape had been killed by prisoners. The newspaper was forced to publish a retraction admitting that reliable police sources had been mistaken, when it transpired that the man was actually alive and imprisoned in Home Prison Leeds. Following the end of the rooftop protest the newspapers condemned the prisoners, with the Daily Telegraph describing the riot as a degrading public spectacle, and the Independent describing the rioters as dangerous and unstable criminals enjoying an orgy of destruction. The Guardian urged the government to institute reforms, a view which was the prevalent one for a time, stating, "Initially, the riot appeared to increase public support for radical reform of the present degrading prison system. Some of that goodwill will have been eroded by the antics of the rioters in the last 2 weeks, and may be further eroded once details emerge during the forthcoming criminal prosecutions. But this must not deflect Home Office ministers from the road down which they had belatedly begun to travel. A change in prison conditions is crucial if good order is to be restored to the system." In its last act before disbanding in 1991, and being replaced by the Press Complaints Commission, the Press Council produced a comprehensive report into the press coverage during the Strangeways riot. The report stated that many of the more gruesome events reported in the press had not occurred. Nobody had been systematically mutilated, there had been no castrations, no bodies had been chopped up and flushed in the sewers. Though there was inter-prisoner violence in the first hours of the riot, torture on the scale suggested by many of the early reports did not take place. It further found that press coverage fell into the serious ethical error of presenting speculation and unconfirmed reports as fact. The Woolf Report. A 5-month public inquiry was held into the disturbances at Strangeways and other prisons, beginning in Manchester on the 11th of June 1990 and ending in London on the 31st of October. In addition to the public inquiry, Lord Woolf and Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons, Stephen Tumim, also sent letters to every prisoner and prison officer in the country. 1,300 prisoners and 430 prison officers responded, with many excerpts from the letters being appended to the finished report. The Woolf Report was published on the 25th of February 1991, and blamed the loss of control of the prison on the prison officers abandoning the gates outside the chapel, which effectively handed the prison to the prisoners. Woolf described the conditions inside Strangeways in the months leading up to the riot as intolerable, and view the combination of errors by staff and management at the prison and prison service as a central contributing factor to the riot. He also blamed the failure of successive governments to provide the resources to the prison service which were needed to enable the service to provide for an increased prison population in a humane manner. Woolf recommended major reform of the prison service, and made 12 key recommendations with 204 accompanying proposals. The key recommendations were: closer cooperation between the different parts of the criminal justice system. For this purpose a national forum and local committees should be established. More visible leadership of the prison service by a Director General, who is and is seen to be the operational head and in day-to-day charge of the service. To achieve this there should be a published compact or contract given by ministers to the Director General of the prison service, who should be responsible for the performance of that contract and publicly answerable for the day-to-day operations of the prison service. Increased delegation of responsibility to governors of establishments. An enhanced role for prison officers. A compact or contract for each prisoner setting out the prisoner's expectations and responsibilities in the prison in which he or she is held. A national system of accredited standards, with which, in time, each prison establishment would be required to comply. A new prison rule that no establishment should hold more prisoners than is provided for in its certified normal level of accommodation, with provisions for Parliament to be informed if exceptionally there is to be a material departure from that rule. A public commitment from ministers setting a timetable to provide access to sanitation for all inmates at the earliest practical date, not later than February 1996. Better prospects for prisoners to maintain their links with families and the community through more visits and home leaves and through being located in community prisons as near to their homes as possible. A division of prison establishments into small and more manageable and secure units. A separate statement of purpose, separate conditions and generally a lower security categorization for remand prisoners. Improved standards of justice within prisons involving the giving of reasons to a prisoner for any decision which materially and adversely affects him, a grievance procedure and disciplinary proceedings which ensure that the governor deals with most matters under his present powers, relieving boards of visitors of their adjudicatory role, and providing for final access to an independent complaints adjudicator. The Guardian newspaper described the report as a blueprint for the restoration of decency and justice into jails where conditions had become intolerable. Home Secretary Kenneth Baker welcomed the Woolf Report and pledged to end slopping out by 1994, and also accepted Woolf's recommendations for more visits, home leave and telephone calls. In contrast to his proposed reforms, Baker also proposed the introduction of a new offence of prison mutiny carrying a maximum sentence of 10 years imprisonment, stating the events of last April marked a watershed in the history of prison service. We cannot, and will not, tolerate the savagery and vandalism in our prisons that we saw then. The first prosecutions in relation to the riot began at Manchester Crown Court on the 14th of January 1992. The trial was conducted amid tight security, including armed police patrolling the area around the court, body searches for spectators and a specially constructed dock with sides made from bulletproof glass. 9 men went on trial charged with riot under Section 1 of the Public Order Act 1986, with 6 of them, including Paul Taylor and Alan Lord, also being charged with the murder of Derek White. On the first day one prisoner pleaded guilty to charges of riot and conspiracy to riot, and was also acquitted of the murder charge. The other defendants were also acquitted of murder due to the unreliability of eyewitness testimony and the possibility that White had died from a pre-existing thrombotic condition. On the 16th of April, 4 defendants including Paul Taylor were convicted of rioting, and the remaining 4 including Alan Lord were acquitted. Taylor received a 10-year sentence, the maximum sentence the judge had the power to impose. The sentences received by the other defendants ranged from 4 years to 9.5 years imprisonment. By the end of the trial the total cost of the Strangeways riot, including refurbishing the prison and the costs of the police inquiry and court case, had reached £112 million. The second trial began at the same court on the 5th of October 1992, and dealt with charges relating to the battle for Ewing on the 3rd of April 1990. There were 14 defendants, including Alan Lord and another man who was acquitted in the first trial, both of whom were added to the list of defendants after their acquittals. 2 defendants pleaded guilty to violent disorder and received 4- and 5-year sentences, which due to the 2 years they had spent on remand awaiting trial resulted in them being freed. The remaining 12 defendants pleaded not guilty to conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm with intent and conspiracy to riot. On the 7th of December 1992, David Bowen and Mark Azzopardi escaped from the prison van, transferring them from Home Prison Hull to the court. Azzopardi was recaptured, before escaping from the court on the 17th of February 1993 along with 5 of the other defendants. At the conclusion of the trial, 2 defendants were acquitted and the remainder found guilty of conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm with intent, the lesser charge of conspiracy to riot automatically being dropped when guilty verdicts were announced on the first charge. When passing sentence, the judge remarked, "You had your period of arrogance and violence in front of the world, but now the price must be paid and paid by you." The defendants received sentences ranging from 4 years to 10 years imprisonment, although only 5 defendants were in court to hear the verdict, as 6 defendants were still on the run after escaping and another was being treated at Ashworth Secure Hospital. Following the second trial, a further 26 defendants were still due to be tried on charges relating to the riot. The Crown Prosecution Service accepted plea bargains where defendants pleaded guilty to violent disorder in exchange for the dropping of other charges, or in some cases all charges were dropped completely. On the 20th of September 1993, the last remaining defendant to maintain a plea of not guilty went on trial, and he was convicted of conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm and sentenced to 30 months imprisonment. On the 18th of March 1994, 6 prisoners appeared in court on charges of escaping from custody during the second riot trial. 5 of them pleaded guilty to escaping from custody on 1 occasion, and Mark Azzopardi pleaded guilty to escaping on 2 occasions. Each was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment for escaping from Manchester Crown Court, and Azzopardi received an additional 2-year sentence for escaping from the van transporting him from Home Prison Hull to the court. In July 1994, David Bowen was convicted of attempting to pervert the course of justice by attempting to influence the jury in the first riot trial, and was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. Paul Taylor, who had already pleaded guilty to the same charge, also received a 3-year sentence. Strangeways was rebuilt and refurbished at a cost of £55 million, and was officially reopened as Home Prison Manchester on the 27th of May 1994. The press were invited to view the new prison and talk to the prisoners by new Governor Derek Lewis. A prisoner told the visiting journalists, "The better conditions in here are not down to the prison department. But for the riot, we would still be in the same old jail banged up all day and slopping out. The rioters brought this about. These conditions should not have cost the lives of a prisoner, a prison officer and 2 huge court trials. They should have done it years ago, but it took a riot to get them to do it." Slopping out was abolished in England and Wales by 1996, and was scheduled to be abolished in Scotland by 1999. Due to budget restraints, the abolition was delayed, and by 2004 prisoners in 5 of Scotland's 16 prisons still had to slop out. Slopping out ended at Home Young Offenders Institution Polmont in 2007, leaving Home Prison Peterhead as the last prison where inmates did not have access to proper sanitation, as 300 prisoners were forced to use chemical toilets due to the difficulty of installing modern plumbing in the prison's granite structure. In 2015, the Daily Telegraph reported that a prisoner serving a 27-year sentence was conducting a lone protest on the roof against conditions and was being cheered by other prisoners. The newspaper also referenced in its own report an interview with former Lord Chief Justice Lord Woolf from earlier in the year, where he described prisoners being kept in intolerable conditions as bad as at the time of the riots. Woolf recommended prisons were kept out of politics. A riot involving several hundred prisoners that occurred at Birmingham Prison in December 2016 was described by prison affairs academic Alex Cavendish as probably the most serious riot in a B-category prison since Strangeways went up. The incident began after a set of keys was stolen from a prison officer while he was trying to lock prisoners in their cells. Prisoners took over 4 of the jail's blocks and broke into the administration part of the prison, where they smashed computer equipment and set personal records alight. Riot officers entered the jail and secured the blocks after 12 hours of disturbance. Thank you all so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed today's strange tale. If you did, please smash that gorgeous like button, and subscribe so that you will be notified to future shows. Also, if you could write a 5-star review, that would really help us get the word out, so other people can enjoy the podcast as well. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Strange Tales Pod. Or you can message me at strangetalespod@gmail.com, with feedback or ideas on future shows. If you would like to support the podcast, you can do so through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/strangetalespod, where we have plans from as little as $3 a month, and you can opt out any time. Any help is much appreciated. This is me, your host Winston R. Douglas, signing out for now. Thanks again, hope to see you again soon.